Hello, EduMagicians. Welcome to the EduMagic podcast with your host, Dr. Sam Fessich. Dr. Sam is a professor of education, author of EduMagic, and a pumpkin spice latte fan. This podcast is designed for pre-service teachers. Remember, friends, teaching doesn't begin at graduation, but during that first class at 8 a.m. Let's get this party started.
I'm AJ Bianco, host of Reflect Ed, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Just like the show you're listening to now, shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today we are sharing about 5 lesson plan essentials and how to hack them, saving you some student-teacher planning time. This episode is brought to you by my Future Teachers store over on Teachers Pay Teachers. You can find lots of resources to help you during your college career and during student teaching right over on the EduMagic Future Teachers store. All right, so before we jump into our lesson planning essentials, let's get 3 things squared away right off the bat. First, we're going to talk about how important it is to get all of your resources together before you start planning. Next, we're going to talk about how we're not going to spend every night lesson planning. And lastly, we're going to work from a template and check out a lesson at a glance. So let's start with our first idea, but before we get into the 5 tips, just a few things to share with you. So before you sit down to plan out any lesson, you have to start to collect all of the resources, get it all together first. So that way you're not in the middle of planning and writing out your lesson. You're like, oh, I forgot the textbook, or oh, what website should I go to? What standard am I working from? Where's that workbook? You have all that information right at your fingertips, ready to go. So anything that you need, whether that are, books or workbooks, worksheets, a website, have it all ready so you don't have to search materials during your lesson planning. You just take a deep breath, fill up your cup of coffee, and start to plan with intention. That being said, we don't want to spend every night of the week lesson planning because we can get really burnt out on that. You don't want to get into the habit of planning your lessons day by day because when we do that with that type of planning, you can get burned out on lesson planning very quickly. So it's important when we think about lesson planning that we don't think of it as a one and done lesson that we're planning for. So we're not checking off the box. So Wednesday, we're not planning for Thursday's lesson. We've already done that. So I recommend thinking about lessons as building from one lesson to another, not one and done lessons. During student teaching, it's really important to learn to plan longitudinally. So meaning you are planning for a few days at a time, and you can make adjustments as you go. So you're not spending every day of the week lesson planning. You are being mindful of your time and setting boundaries around your lesson planning time. So that also doesn't mean as soon as you get home from teaching, you are spending till 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night lesson planning. You want to be protective of your time. So say whenever you get home, let's say around 4 o'clock, you grab a snack, or grab some dinner, maybe you relax a little bit for an hour, and then say around 6 o'clock, from 6 to 8, that's your lesson planning time. And you make that a real intentional boundary. So you're able to take care of yourself and plan your lessons accordingly, giving you enough time. So I suggest if you're a student teacher in middle or in secondary that you plan the week ahead. If you're a student teaching in elementary, I recommend planning 2 days in advance. That way you have time to plan time for yourself and plan in time for your lessons. So for example, use Sunday to plan for Monday and Tuesday, use Tuesday to plan for Wednesday, Thursday, use Wednesday to plan for Friday. And then that way you can adjust and tweak your delivery and pacing based on the class that you're teaching. Also note, if your college or cooperating teacher required you to have your lesson plans in on a specific day, like say if you are teaching on Monday, you have to have your lesson plans that before on that Friday turned in, turn those in on time. Just make sure that you are following your college or your cooperating teacher's timeline for lesson plan, for turning in your lesson plans and how to turn them in. So some People like them written and turned in. Some people like them typed up and printed and turned in. Others are digital. So however your college supervisor or your cooperating teacher prefers you to hand in your lessons, make sure you're doing that. One other thing that you're going to want to consider to save you some lesson planning time is to use the model that your college or co-op requires you to use. Once you've designed your lesson plan using a long lesson plan format, you can then pull the pieces from your larger lesson plan into a document that I like to call a lesson plan at a glance. Using this lesson plan at a glance, you can pull in that important information from your long form lesson plan, put that at the beginning of the period or beginning of the day. That way, whenever you're reviewing to prepare for your lesson coming up, say you're prepping prep period 2, you teach period 3, you can review that lesson plan at a glance very quickly. So this lesson plan at a glance should include your standards, your objectives, anticipatory set, instructional materials, instruction, materials, assessment, adaptations, and closure. These are just quick bullet point pieces of information to help guide you, for you to refer to, and to help review. If you want a copy of the lesson at a glance template, it is a part of the student teacher planner bundle found over on my Teachers Pay Teachers site. Let's jump into today's episode. We're going to talk about 5 lesson plan essentials. First, standards. We can't just teach whatever we want. We have to tie our content and our objectives to our learning standards. So one hack for this, instead of always Googling your standards, is to have it saved, bookmarked on your computer, on a tab. I love having a tab called Daily Essentials, or my daily tab, where I have all of the stuff that I go to daily on my computer in that folder. You might want to do that. Or you could have, for each of the subjects that you were teaching, go to that specific link that has all of the standards for that subject, for example, English or social studies. Grab that link, create a QR code that goes right to that link, and then in a Word doc, create a table that has the name of the subject and right next to it, the QR code. So English standards, QR code, math, the next column or the next row, and then the QR code that goes to the math standards. And then you can print that one pager, and as you're planning, scan that QR code, and then you have the standards right there at your fingertips, and you can put that page right into your student teacher planner. Another lesson plan essential is reviewing content and gaining attention. So before you deliver content to students, before you deliver any instructions to your students, you have to get their attention. So there's lots of ways you can gain attention or gain interest in a lesson. Consider relating it to their real life or the real world. Give them a scenario. Give them an image. What do they see? What do they notice? Give them an example. And then after you've gained their attention, make sure you review the content that you learned previously. That way they can make new connections to information and continue to build upon that knowledge. Next, lesson plan essential is adaptation. So make sure that you are adapting instruction as needed for your students so they can be successful in your classroom. Keep track of any accommodations and modifications so you know that you're meeting their needs. It might be helpful to have the list of accommodations that you need for your lessons readily available. Make sure you're being confidential in writing those up, and make sure that you're protecting the student privacy. So for example, if you have a student who needs content always in size 18 font, in your adaptations, you might have a bullet point that says print out worksheet in 18 size font. That you're going to have that for any time you have a handout. Or if you're using a presentation, making sure you have large font on that. Just a quick example there. Next up, we have closure. We all know that a well thought out and planned lesson has an intro and a clear ending, right? Think of it as sealing the envelope of learning with a very shiny, sparkly sticker or scratch and sniff sticker, whichever you like. A closure needs to recap what's learned. And a great way to do that is maybe providing a story or providing a visual, providing an example, or a peek back to the anticipatory set. So going back to what they had learned at the beginning of the lesson. We just don't want to teach our lesson, do guided practice, give them homework, and say, all right, let's move on to the next class. We want to close that envelope of learning with a great scratch and sniff sticker that talks about, hey, this is what we did in class today. You can pair that closure up with an exit activity. So, for example, there's lots of different ways to end lessons using an exit ticket. Try some different ones out and see what works best for your students. For example, have students do a drawing or create a mind map. Have them do an exit ticket. As they leave, they have to write down 2 things they learned, 1 thing they have a question about. Give them an emoji scale of how they're feeling about today's lesson. Or write a test question on the topic from today. Can they give an example of the question of the topic that we talked about in class today? How does this topic relate to their lives? What are they going to do with this information? How does it relate to them? What are they going to do with that information in 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 weeks? Whatever the topic is, there's lots of ways that you can gauge how students understood that content through an exit ticket, but make sure you pair that with closure. And last, we have reflection. So it's so easy to just go into our reflection part of our lesson plan. All right, what went well? What didn't go well? We want to get out of that type of mindset and change up our reflection questions based on what the lesson is that we're teaching. So you're not teaching the same lesson twice. So your reflection questions shouldn't be the same. Be specific in your questions and make them meaningful for you. So use the opportunity to learn from your teaching and don't just go through the motions of reflection. For example, if you're doing a lesson as station rotation, reflect upon that. How'd you do with your timing, your pacing? How did students do with the different stations? What feedback did you get? What are you going to do next time you do a station rotation? Maybe consider having a timer up on the front of the board or have music play as they move throughout their stations. Really push yourself beyond what went well and what you would do differently in that lesson. Think about specific strategies that you're using, specific technology tools, or a technique that you're trying in class. All right, so I know that was a lot. Let's recap. So before we go back through those 5 essentials, a couple of mindset shifts. First, get everything that you need for that lesson. Get all those materials and resources together so you can plan with ease and you're not looking for everything. You have it all at your fingertips. We're not going to be planning every day of the week. We're going to be planning a little bit at a time. We're going to be mindful of our time. We're going to set boundaries around our lesson planning. We're going to be working from the college or cooperating teacher lesson plan template, but then we can pull that information into a lesson at a glance so we can quickly review and see what we're teaching that day. And then the 5 essentials for our lesson plan should be standards, reviewing content and gaining attention from our students, adapting content to meet the needs of our students, providing closure for our lesson, and reflecting with purpose. All right, friends, I hope that this episode was helpful for you. I would love to hear one of your tips for lesson planning. Head on over to Instagram and share your favorite lesson planning tip with me. All right, friends, remember, you have the Edu Magic within you. Bye for now.
And there you have it, Edu Magicians. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. For more Edu Magic, check out sfessage.com and follow Dr. Sam on Twitter and Instagram @sfessage. Until next time, you have the Edu Magic within you.